Okay, so Nokia 62018. Well, what has changed? Okay, the design maybe hasn't, but the internals have, which was my main gripe of last year's model with the low-end CPU. Now, Nokia has listened and they've proved me right with this year bumping up to a Snapdragon 630. And how much of a better phone this is just because of that and the improved internals, we will see. But before that, I have to actually explain one thing. This is not the international version. This is an imported version that I got from CCT Shop running a custom shop ROM that allows me to get multi-language support and also running all Google services with the Play Store. So just keep in mind, there might be some differences in terms of maybe even performance, battery life, but definitely in terms of software. But I think it's good enough to review it anyway. So let's check the design and compare with the only phone that I have that is kind of in that size range. As you can see, this is shorter than the OnePlus 5T. In terms of width though, very, very similar, but it is thicker. And the only gripe that I have with the design is still what I had last year. The hard edgy design with these 90-degree angles that have these beveled edges that just feel a little bit uncomfortable in the hand because the whole phone just feels very edgy. It's not smooth and round. Of course, if you prefer that, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not my particularly first choice, but it does definitely feel very solid. There is no creaking, very well made, very solid, very nicely done, especially the buttons. Great tactile feedback. They are a little bit flat, but positioned very well and they click very well. Now the fingerprint reader is not positioned that well because, as you can see, it's actually positioned lower than the power button, and therefore I usually always have my finger here and then just slide downwards because I could not get used to this position. It's just a little bit awkwardly low. You will get used to it at some point, maybe especially if you do this trick, but even then I have to say the fingerprint reader is subpar because it's not super reliable, and if you have just slightly maybe dusty hands, a little bit dirty or sweaty, it just won't react. So the speed is okay, but also not great. So not the biggest fan of that, but it gets the job done totally. The camera does protrude a little bit, as you can see here, with my camera having some issues with it. But the design I actually like a lot, especially with those great orange copper accents here. I really love that design with the dark blue. It really looks cool. We also have a little bit of a curve on the back, but then the rest is flat. Some people like to hold on to that. But what I have to mention about the front, we have a little bit of a kind of plastic rim here that has a little bit of a curve, and then the display actually as well has a little bit of a curve, which the front then makes it feel very, very soft. I like that. But of course we also, just because of that, have some bigger bezels. This is still kind of like 2017 design, even maybe older. But other than that, we have the headphone jack, antenna lines, SD card and SIM card tray. Then we have USB Type-C now, speaker here, microphone here, notification LED is present, sorry, the camera, of course, the earpiece, no capacitive buttons, and not the fingerprint reader on the front like we had last year, which a few people have complained about, but yeah, it is what it is. But therefore we have navigation buttons. Before you wonder, my version here allows me to change the buttons, which I think will not be a thing of the international official ROM. But let's get into the display. What I would have definitely wished for, sorry, would have been some options to kind of calibrate the screen or have some different changes, but there is nothing there, unfortunately. There's not much wrong with the calibration of the display, but it would have been nice because it feels a little bit on the colder side. Maximum brightness was at 480 lux, which is just about maybe on average. It won't be all that great in heavy sunlight, but in normal situations, indoors and such, it absolutely gets the job just done fine. Viewing angles are absolutely okay. Colors are okay. The calibration otherwise, besides the slightly cold white, is good. Sharpness is also fine. So the display is definitely a good one. Absolutely. No problems at all. Actually, definitely better than it was last year. It feels a little bit more high quality. But what about those speakers? Actually, the only one. I'm pretty sure this must have even been audible on the video recording, even though my microphone usually picks it up a little bit nicer than it actually is. But the speaker is, I would say, barely loud enough. It's okay, but it's very harsh, very piercing, pretty much no bass, no mids and just highs, and this is just very awkward because we have very many sibilants that you hear, and it's not really all that great, and a lot of people have agreed with me on that when I show this device to them. Otherwise though, the headphone jack, even though we have no extra options also to tune it, is okay, absolutely no problems. So let's get into the performance, and like I said, keep in mind that it could be a little bit different due to the stock ROM here, but I have to say, this is exactly on what I would have expected on a 630 device, because it's very smooth. What I've noticed though, but that is a general thing actually of the 630, some more slowdowns compared to the 625. So you won't have a performance upgrade over 625. I actually think the 625 is overall the better phone, because as you can see, apps launch absolutely okay, and it's a very nice, smooth feeling, and everything is usually also in terms of multitasking with the 4 GB of RAM, even though it just shows 3.63, usually fine. Very consistent. A few slowdowns, yes, but this is still in line with pretty much every other 625 or 630 phone. So it does feel quite okay. It doesn't feel crazy snappy, it doesn't feel anything like that, but it does the job just fine. And I don't want to complain because this is still delivering a really nice daily use performance, and 630 is still pretty much what most people would be happy, and no one really needs more. Also, gaming performance was just fine. So let's get into the battery, and I actually want to show you the stats because I'm too lazy to actually put them with an overlay in. So as you can see here, half an hour, 51%, and 1 hour 50 for a full charge, 11% for 1 hour of YouTube, and then I got battery life of 6.5 hours, roughly that. I got a little bit over 6 hours once, and sometimes a little bit less than 7 hours. So let's say an average of 6.5 hours on mobile data, and then around 8 hours on Wi-Fi, which is definitely a very good value, absolutely. Standby drain wasn't amazing, but it was very good despite anything else. So services running and all that, it could be even better, especially if it runs a different version. Which brings me to the software, because let's cover that. This is running 7.1.1. I'm not sure what the actual official ROM by right now is. It should be already Oreo, I think, but there might be also some differences, because as you have seen, especially in the display part, we can change the soft keys. You only have these options along with the collapsing navbar, but there might be some changes. But other than that, it's still pretty much stock Android, because we have the app drawer. We don't really have anything else. As you can see, this is pretty much still what we would expect. It seems a little bit themed, but I think that was last year already the case. So there is not much to say. This is pretty much just a stock ROM. It didn't come with any bloat. It came very fine. It runs smooth. It feels optimized. Not really any extra features, maybe besides some things like motion, as you can see here, or other things. And that's why I just don't want to get too much into that. I don't think it really has a big impact in terms of battery life, not for sure, because that was great, what I would expect from the battery. Performance felt just fine. So I don't think this version that I'm reviewing it with will kind of hold it back, but I just wanted to have to mention, because at least with this now, you have multi-language support, you have Play Store. If you choose the other ROM that you can get on CCT Shop, you just get stock Android, which is the Chinese version. You get the original ROM, but then you will get OTA support, which you won't get here. So just keep that in mind. Especially I've heard if you run the stock Android, or I mean the stock version here, it's very hard to actually get the Play Store running after all. So let's just go into that another time maybe and talk about the camera. One thing that I want to mention, but not gonna go into much more, is we have the Bofi mode, which as you can see here shows both cams at the same time. There's also a picture-in-picture mode. I'm not quite sure how useful that actually is. I don't think many will actually use it. It's a little bit more of a gimmick, but we have auto HDR. The way you have to change those options is a little bit weird. I would have wished it to be just a toggle. And other than that, for example, the resolution change you have to do in the settings. But other than that, the software is fine. We have a manual mode, of course. We have the only thing that I have to mention is about the camera, which is one thing I don't like. If you switch to the front cam, it automatically always switches to the beautify mode. And if you just want to take a normal picture without the beautification or the kind of background blur, you have to go to photo. So camera software isn't the best one. It totally gets the job done, but the pictures are important. So let's check these. And especially when it comes to the front-facing camera, I like that one a lot, because as you can see here, This looks very nice from pretty much all distances. It feels in focus, so a nice focus range. Pictures also seem very nice. The exposure sometimes wasn't amazing, as you can see here. The beautify mode, it sometimes cuts off my hair a little bit oddly, so it's not perfect, but it gets the job done, as you can see, especially here with those weird things around my head that weren't really there, and it sometimes just cuts off the hair. But I like the quality, I like the sharpness, colors seem fine. Exposure not always, especially if you use HDR mode, because as you can see here, this is normal, this is HDR. So I'm not quite sure why HDR does actually the complete opposite what it does on the main cam, because it brightens things up unnaturally, which is definitely different on the main cam, which you will see later on. But even indoors, it feels fine. It feels generally a little bit dark. And especially if you have low light situations, then it gets quite blurry and not really that great. So low light capabilities on the front casing cam are not amazing. But overall, I really like the cam because the results look mostly very, very good. Now outside, weather was decent. It wasn't amazing. But what absolutely was painful was the slow autofocus. Whenever you have a motive and you want something to get done, you have to wait like 1 to 3 seconds, and even in low light longer, which is just weird. And it's also, especially on macros, as you have seen, not always spot on. But if the camera is good, and obviously with better lighting conditions, I would have gotten better pictures. But let's be honest, we don't really have them all the time. And this, for example, now without HDR, now HDR. So it gets more contrasty, but it also gets darker, which is actually the opposite what many other cams do with HDR. So yeah, just about that. But otherwise, I really like the cam. If it gets things in focus, which just takes longer than usual, but as you can see here, just doesn't always work. The camera quality, the potential is definitely there. And like I said, this I think actually could have to do something with the shop ROM. I think actually Nokia's proper ROM will have better camera, a little bit of an optimized mode. Not that it's bad here, but I think it will be better. And here, for example, the Bofi mode, that I don't think is something all that impressive here with the picture-in-picture mode. Yeah, low light though, I have to say, actually quite disappointing. Without the flash, very blurry. With the flash, completely overexposed. In this case, it also didn't get the focus right. Here, once again, pretty much the same. In this case, also blur, but at least here it got it quite right. Indoors with, I would say, okay lighting, it is okay. But I've definitely seen better low light cameras. So let's get into video, and we have 4K. And yes, there are a few artifacts visible, especially at the start, but then it gets fine. But it's usually actually on a good quality. Of course, there wasn't too much light today, it wasn't just bright yet, but slow autofocus is visible here. Not so much of an issue for video, because at least then you don't get too much of some focus hunting, because it just waits, so you have to have the camera still. But what I really like is what you will see right now is the very good 4K quality, because the picture seems a little bit kind of shaky or nervous, but it feels very sharp, and I like the colors and so on. So the video cam is definitely very nice. I like the 4K quality. Now if you switch to 1080p, which is something I actually can really recommend, because, or I just don't see a need for it, because you have a little bit less artifact, but anything else is just about a little bit worse than 4K, and I don't see a need not to go for 4K. So just go for 4K unless you need smaller file sizes, because autofocus is just about the same and so on. So I would say just stick with 4K. Front-facing cam I like a lot, because as you can see here, very sharp. It feels a little bit maybe over-sharpened, but great colors. Okay, one thing that I've noticed though, what you will see if I switch a little bit more with the camera, that the exposure is a little bit inconsistent, so it switches up quite quickly. It feels a little bit kind of trying to overdo it, but the picture itself looks really good. And yes, I have to mention Ozo audio. Yeah, I'm not gonna show it because for some reason I can't really get the sound right over the cam here, but the video sounds really good, very clean, good quality. If I go into this section, it gets a little bit more echo, but a very good high quality audio, so I like it. But as you can see also for video, in low light situations, it's breaking down quite noticeably. So that's good enough. I would say let's go into the conclusion. You can see the rating, you can see the pros and cons, but I have to say this now, compared to last year, is a way more matured, way more balanced phone, because even though they haven't improved the edgy design, which wasn't my particular first choice, because it feels a little bit uncomfortable over a longer period of time, but the size is okay, the build quality is great. They improved the display, they did not improve the sound unfortunately, which is still very piercing. The performance got noticeably better compared to the 430 that we had last year. Now with the 630, things are running just fine, and this is what it should have been already last year. Battery life is also absolutely top, software is clean. And the camera for this price range does a good job. It's a little bit unreliable, it's a little bit of a hit and miss, but I think with some future updates, which you will get on the international version for sure, not on this shop ROM, I don't think this will be an issue, and it will actually improve, because I think it actually is already better on the stock ROM that it comes with. But I also have to mention just one thing, even though it is a better phone than last year, this from CCT Shop costs around 200 euros. Maybe there are some tax extra, some ship costs extra with some taxes, but it's still definitely very good for the price. But the international version, at least here in Germany, costs 280 euros. So you have to see if you want to save some money or get just the proper international support, or wherever you are, check the prices, because I know they vary, especially in India and so on, a lot. But especially in some other regions, like for example Germany, the competition is very strong. We have a lot of phones that are just about as good as this one for a pretty similar price, like for example the Moto X4, that feels a little bit rounder but just about as good in terms of quality. Display is just about as good, the sound is better, camera a little bit different, but as you can see, also the Nokia, something like the Samsung Galaxy A5 2017, which is a little bit older, or some other phones, you definitely have to consider those at around 200 to 250, but even something like a Xiaomi Redmi 5 Plus that is noticeably cheaper is actually still a super strong contender, and I would actually prefer that. But again, you have to sometimes support that, not actually always anymore. But that's it. I noticed that I pretty much said all I wanted to say, and it's getting a little bit flaky, so I'm just gonna cut this video off right now. I hope it was helpful. If you have any further questions, just leave them down below. And compared to my rant last year, I have to say it's a better phone, and now I can actually recommend it without any issues, especially if you want a stock ROM, if you want Nokia's experience, and if you want their great hardware and software. I have no issues with that. But just keep in mind, if you have an open mind, that there is competition at this price that is also super strong. So that's it. Until next time, bye.